Welcome. It's Sunday, and we're on Sarah Bishop, chapter 22. So let me share screen. And let's open up Google Chrome. Here I am, chapter 22. Let me move this over. So, yeah, I'm looking actually sort of at you. Okay, so just wherever we left off. So Sarah has lost her brother, her dad, and then brother, right? Because he was a prisoner of war. And she goes through several steps, cuts off her hair, and the ferryman who gave her a ride, because she's trying to get as far away from the captain and the Heshman soldier who may possibly be looking for her because they tried to say that she lit a hotel on fire, just maybe to be able to set her brother free from prison, but he really wasn't there in the first place. So needless to say, she's moving from place to place. The ferryman gave her a gun, but right here at the end, she has found a cave, and she crept in, and remember, she'd scared out a bunch of deer. So here's a couple foxes in there. She scares them out basically. And last she found a place to rest. She was tempted to pray, but she didn't. Remember, she's sort of questioning her beliefs because of so much bad things happening, and like she's supposed to forgive her enemies and that sort of thing, when her enemies are responsible for her father's death and her brother's. And again, I still don't remember what had happened to her mother. So maybe you know, and you can tell me in class. Chapter 22. The day was dawning cold and clear. Its first light shone through the jagged mouth of the cave. I gazed around me at what I had only dimly seen before. I was in a room shaped like an irregular square with smooth walls and a stone floor. The walls slanted inward and came together high over my head to form a crude vault. At the top of this vault was a jagged hole that let in the light. It would also be a good place for fire smoke to leave. In the center of the room, near the place where I had built a fire, was a ring of ashes, and beside it sat 6 clay pots, all of them broken. On the 4 walls were pictures painted in dim red and brown colors, showing a bear, a large forest cat, and some sort, and a herd of running deer. Who do you think was using the cave before? Native Americans, possibly? I bet so. What happened? What happened? Okay. Don't press the forward button. I think it takes you to the next file. At first, let's see. Oh, am I in the right spot? Yes. At first, gazing around me, I felt uncomfortable. People had lived here once. The ashes were cold and the pots covered with dust, yet the people might return. But as I sat there, I began to feel differently about them. Whoever they were, those who had built fires and painted pictures, their pictures had almost faded away into the stone. Their pots were broken. Their fires were rings of cold gray ashes. The cave had been here for a long, long time. Likely it had sheltered many. It had sheltered those who had been here last, and they in turn had left. I got to my feet. The fire was dying. I kindled it with powder and rolled a big log up against it. It was then, when the fire began to burn anew, that I decided I had gone far. I had gone far enough. I went to the mouth of the cave and looked out. The sun was behind a ridge. It was the dark time before the real dawn. Below me, at the foot of a wooded slope, were 2 small ponds, and between them a deep blue lake that stretched away to the west. It was a beautiful land that lay there in the shadows before dawn. Yes, I said to myself, I've gone as far as I will go. While I stood at the mouth of the cave, gazing down at the wilderness of forest and water, I was aware of a rushing sound, softer than the running deer had made up, but loud. It was the sound of wings, hundreds of wings pouring past me into the mouth of the cave. Ooh, you know what those are, don't you? I'm thinking bats. The flight lasted for several minutes. When it was over, I went back into the cave. At the very top of the vault was a gleam of sunlight. It shone on a black, heaving mass of twittering bats hanging upside down from a rocky ledge. I couldn't live in a cave full of noisy creatures, so the first thing I did was to build a lean-to outside against the of the face of a rock. That took me a half morning of hard work. I remembered that one summer at home, we had a pair of bats fly into the house. They stayed there, hanging on a rafter for 3 days until father thought of leaving a door open at night. They flew in at night, he said. They'll leave the same time. And they did. At dusk, after the bats had flown out, some from the opening at the top, but most of them from below, swooping past by the hundreds, but never touching me, I covered the mouth of the cave with a blanket. The opening at the top I left to serve as a smoke hole. The next morning, I saw some of the creatures hanging upside down in the trees around the cave. The following day, I saw none. They apparently had found a new home somewhere. I gathered pine wood and built a big fire in the cave and kept it going for 2 days. At the end of that time, I collected my belongings and left the lean-to. I was happy to learn that the pine smoke had cleaned out the heavy air. I needed the blanket at night, so I took it down and made a crude hingeless door of birch saplings. Near the mouth of the cave, in the midst of an alder grove, 3 springs came out of the rocks and formed a stream that wandered down the slope and emptied into the lake. There were many pools along the way, some dammed up by beavers, all with fish. I caught 2 small trout by chasing them into the shallows and scooping them out on the bank. I cooked both for supper, being hungry for the first time in weeks. A cold wind was blowing, and I thought that what I heard was the wind whistling through the cracks in my makeshift door. Then I caught glimpses of a shadowy figure darting back and forth. It would disappear high up toward the roof, then it would fly toward the door. I remembered again the time that the 2 bats flew into our house. The first night I got scared and hid in the woodshed. While I was hiding, my brother Chad rolled up one of my stockings. He came to the door and shouted that bats were flying. At the same moment, he threw the rolled up stocking and hit me square on the head. I thought it was one of the bats and that it was tangled in my hair. I jumped up and screamed and ran outside. I thought about that time now as the bat swooped around my ears. At last, I got up and took down the door. In a second, it was gone. At dawn, when I went out, it was clinging to one of the birch saplings. It was smaller than my hand and pure white, except for a pink dot on its forehead and small pink markings under its wings. I carried the bat inside and put it in a dark corner. At dusk, I took down the door and it flew off to hunt for food. At dawn, it returned. I thought hard, trying to find a name for the little creature. It was all white except for pink. It reminds me maybe it was an albino bat. Anyway, she sounds like me. I totally care for all the animals, the squirrels, the birds, you name it. Okay, here we go. I'm going to go ahead and start with chapter 23. So she's made herself a place so that she feels like she's gone far enough away that those men aren't a threat. And she's made herself a place in the cave and gotten rid of most of the bats, right? There was so much I had to do that the following day I got in a panic and did nothing except sit in the front of the cave and watch the flocks of geese flying down from the north. They circled the lake in wedges, calling and honking, then settled on the lake. Some of the flocks flew close, and I could see their black, shining necks and the white slashes on their cheeks. But the next day I worked hard gathering acorns, about 3 bushels of them, which I husked, then pounded with a rock and washed in the stream. I spread the coarse flour on a blanket in front of the fire and let it dry all night. Using part of a hollow log and a club, I ground the flour still further. That night, I set it out to dry again. There were many dried gourds in the meadow. I cleaned out a dozen of the biggest and filled them with flour. I made a big loaf of bread for supper. It was much coarser and not so flavorful as the wheat flour from Purdy's mill, but better than it might have been. The weather continued bright and cold. The maples were still aflame. Geese kept coming in from the north, so many that they shaded the sun, so many that I managed to kill 2 of them with only 1 shot. The feathers I stuffed between the 2 blankets, which made a thick, warm comforter. I made a bed of pine boughs laced with moss and rushes. It was not so soft as my bed at home, nor some of the beds I'd slept in during my travels, but I was tired out every night and could have slept on the bare stone. For 5 days, I brought in firewood from the surrounding forest. I cut some, but mostly it was timber that had fallen during storms in years past. I made a stack that filled 1 whole side of the cave, a row deep and a shoulder high. It was enough. I knew from times on the farm to keep a fire burning through the long days and nights of winter with some despair. I still lacked meat. I had seen tracks along the edge of the marsh where a bear had been feeding, but I had strong doubts about my skill with the musket, despite my lucky shot at the geese. I had threatened Sam Goshen with it, but I had not confronted a bear. My brother had killed one. a small one, but remembering the scare he had had with it, I decided against the idea. If I came upon a bear suddenly and had a choice of shooting or being clawed, that would be different. Herds of deer came down to the pond every evening to drink, about a dozen of them in each herd, plump and sleek after summer feeding. On the farm, my brother shot deer all year long, and I had helped him dress the carcasses. That means, cut them out, cut the fur off, and take apart the different sections. I cooked and ate the meat, but I never enjoyed any of it. I remember how beautiful their eyes were when they were living. I killed one of them and had no bad feelings about it. I stretched the hide and pegged it out to dry in front of the cave. I planned to make a mat from part of it and a bed cover from the rest. The first night, however, animals came. I think they were foxes, and dragged the hide away. I found the hide, but it was so chewed up I could not use it, though I did save some strips. I fished in the stream and caught trout. They were so plentiful that I had no trouble scooping them out of the shallows and onto the bank. They had many colored speckles, and their flesh was pink. I split them down the center and cooked them crisp over the fire, heads and all. I thought about smoking some for winter, but put it off from day to day. There were too many things to do. I made wicks from threads I stole from the blankets, poured deer tallow in more than a dozen dry gourds. Tallow is like the deer fat. So she's got some fat, and made candles that would burn for days, each of them. I also made a store of rush lights using deer tallow and rushes gathered in the marsh. If I'd had flax or wool, I might have tried to fashion a small loom, for I needed a dress badly. As it was, I had nothing to do after supper except go to bed. I had no desire to read the Bible. I had put it away on a shelf I made when I first came, and I had not taken it down. The white bat was company. I let it out at dusk every night and watched it fly away. Sometimes it would fly around the mouth of the cave while I stood there, as if it did so to be friendly. I still had not thought of a name for it. I lost track of the days. It was November, but I could not account for all the time since I had left the lion and lamb. Guessing, I decided the date was November 7th. I scratched it on the wall with my jackknife. It was as good a date as any. Thereafter, I would scratch a mark beside it, one for each day that passed. Oh, we're on to chapter 24. I just want to continue. So things are going good in her shelter, right? And she's fishing, she's hunting. She decided against trying to get a bear because she doesn't trust her use of the firearm. Nothing like angering a bear and then it comes and gets you. So she said she'd use the gun in defense if she was being clawed, but otherwise she was not going to do that. Let's see, what else? There's water available to her. She's stacked up wood and she's ready to go. She's making stuff out of the deer tallow. Fox took off with, she's thinking they were fox, the animals at night took off with the deer hide that she was hoping to be able to use. She's making little lamps basically, so that she, because it's November, it's going to be cold soon. She's getting ready for the cold season. She's made lots of flour out of acorns. Maybe I'll stop now. So that will be 2, right? I was on 22, 23. Yeah, 2 chapters. Okay, I'll come back.